Well, a very big welcome and a very big hello to you all. Thanks for joining us on the line. My name is Natalie Ashdown from Open Door Coaching. Welcome to our Coaching Cafe webinar, where today we are looking at setting up for that successful annual performance conversation season. Quite a bit of a mouthful for our introduction, but we're thinking about that. It's annual performance time, annual performance review time, and how do we actually set up for that entire season that we have ahead of us. So before I begin, let me just acknowledge the traditional owners, the custodians on the lands on which we're all meeting today, and their continuing connection to the land, waters, communities of Australia. And we pay our respects to them and to their elders past, present and emerging. And hi, Sonia, dialing in from Cape Town. And we know that there's lots of people dialing in from all around the world actually to our coaching cafes. Perhaps you're listening to this live or you're listening to this on our podcast. So we extend our acknowledgement to the countries and the lands that you are meeting us on today as well. So our agenda for today, we are going to look at the annual performance review process, which is happening now. Lots of companies are in this zone right now. And how do we actually set this up for success and why it's so important? And I have a pleasure to welcome a very special guest speaker to the line who's going to give us our key tips. So for those of you that are new to the Coaching Cafe, welcome. We are all about creating a community, sharing learned experiences. We want to have thought-provoking conversations together. And the way you can interact with us today is via the chat box. I will be able to pick up all of your comments and questions, and via the chat box, we want to learn from you as well as sharing knowledge with you. And of course, if you are here because you want to pick up your ICF CCEUs, they are available free of charge, and we will give them to you at the end of the session as well. So there you go. We're all right to go. So let me do a quick introduction. I am delighted, overly excited as you know I can get, to introduce you all to our resident HR specialist. She has over 20 years experience in HR and many, many years in coaching experience. So Paula Jones-Hunt, welcome to the line. Thank you for joining us for the first time on the Coaching Cafe.
It is an absolute pleasure, Natalie.
So Paula, I suppose what I've admired most about you, and this is the reason why I thought let's get you on the line with everyone today. What I've most admire about you is your ability to apply coaching in really tough environments, for example, in mining and industrial relations scenarios. And I know that you've often been alone when it comes to coaching, as in no one else is doing coaching. And that's why we quoted you in Bring Out Their Best, actually, as saying, despite that, we should be asking one great coaching question at a time. So I just wanted to say that from me to you. Thank you for championing those tough conversations in workplaces where there's not much coaching going on.
Oh, well, thank you. And I have worked in some, I've had the pleasure of working in some amazing environments, but really tough. And, I've worked in Aboriginal organisations where coaching wasn't an area that they really had looked at before. And I really wanted to see whether coaching would work in that sort of environment as well. And lo and behold, it absolutely does, because what you're really doing is great coaching is connecting with people and building relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know as soon as you open your mouth and start to speak, I start writing things down. So hopefully everyone will take heaps of notes as we go along today as well. And Paula, I know you've seen your fair share of performance conversations as well in this environment in your HR roles, including the really difficult ones. And we know that the annual performance reviews, the season, is happening for a lot of people out there. And you and I were discussing like how important is it that we coach managers to have these successful coaching conversations. And I was very keen that you might share some tips with the alumni as well. I'm wondering, can we talk about why it's so important? So, and I've got a graph here to show to the alumni, to everyone on the line as well, about why coaching conversations are so important. But would you share with us your view of that? Why do we have to get these performance conversations and the reviews? Why do we have to get it right?
Yeah, I actually think what the fundamental of why performance reviews were developed in the first place was really about providing staff members with feedback as to how they've been going through the year, through a period of time. And if we think about, I mean, fundamentally, that's the reason for them. I think over the last 50 years, I think they weren't used correctly in lots of places. And so they were used as a tool to let people know when they're not doing the right thing. And I also think they got somewhere along the line too, they got a little messed up with, they got overly complicated, they got linked to all sorts of things that they probably shouldn't be linked to. But if we go back to the reason why these conversations are so important, it's because fundamentally every person needs to know how they're doing in their role. They need to know the things that they should continue to do in the role, the things that they do really great. And if there are areas that need to have, where we need to focus and do some coaching in, they need to know what those areas are as well. The interesting thing though is, for most people, they actually know the answers to all of those questions anyway. And coaching is a great way to start those conversations in performance reviews. And coaching is a great way for the people like myself who work with managers to help them prepare for those conversations as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. There's a couple of things that came up with me around mixing up. So we're talking about the annual performance reviews where we sit down and do the review, as opposed to performance management processes where I'm putting someone on a performance management plan, i.e. something's gone wrong. So we are talking about the annual reviews as opposed to the management process, but it does get mixed up a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And any HR person will tell you that there should be no surprises in an annual review.
Exactly.
So nothing that comes up shouldn't be something that the person hasn't actually heard before. The annual performance review is a wrap up of what the last 12 months looked like, or even 6 months if you're doing mid-year reviews. What did the last 6 months, what did the last 12 months look like? And it should be a continuation of a conversation you've already been having with that person. So if you're going to introduce something new, and lots of managers, I see it all the time, they go, oh, I just want to talk to them about this. I hadn't talked to them about it before. I go, that might be a really great conversation, but when would be the best time to have that conversation? And generally it's not during that performance review process.
Yeah, well, that's a great tip too. So thinking about when are we having certain conversations? Yeah, absolutely. And we're also lucky, for those of you that can't see the graph because you might be podcasting or listening to the audio, if those conversations we're having, those performance review conversations we're having, focus on performance strengths rather than weaknesses, then we see a huge uplift in performance over time as well. So for those people that are coaching managers around high performance and uplift in performance, then we get a huge uplift in performance. And this study, for those of you that haven't seen it, it's quite old, from the Corporate Leadership Council back in 2002. But what's significant about it, and all of you that have done the Cert 4 will see the data in the modules, and you'll know this, but what's significant about it was 90,000 employees surveyed over 135 organisations. So quite significant to look at a 36.5% uplift in performance if we focus on strengths, for example, during performance conversations. So I think that also brings us to our first tip then, Paula, around that you've been brainstorming these with me, and I'm like, how do we condense? We don't want to condense all of your knowledge down into a 20-minute a 20-minute conversation. We will be continuing these conversations over time, by the way, everybody, and feel free, jump into the chat box, tell us what you think about these tips. I just tried to pull out some major ones out of your head, Paula. The first one was around changing your mindset. So it is a bit what we've talked about already, isn't it? Around performance conversations. What are you thinking about when you were talking about changing your mindset now?
Yeah, it's really about helping managers understand that the way that they talk about performance reviews and the actions that they take actually sets a precedent for how employees view it. So if you've got a manager who is, or you're setting up a system and people are, the whole conversation is, well, geez, it takes up a lot of my time, and you know, it's very time consuming. How that translates to an employee is, my manager doesn't have time to do this or doesn't value the time for this. So sometimes it's about making sure and helping a manager understand that the things that they're saying and how they're presenting performance reviews will actually kickstart how successful that actually is. So you can, if managers are talking about it in a positive light, if they're talking about you don't have to say, oh my Lord, I'm so excited, it's performance review time, because most people wouldn't say that. But in the team meetings, if they're talking about how great is it that we're going to have this opportunity to have a really great formal conversation and record it so that we can really celebrate the successes that we've had and look at how we move forward, versus, guess what, it's performance review time, you'll have to attend this session, you have to do this. It's just about changing the mindset about how that leader is presenting what this time means.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. It's not like, we always talk about keeping this real as well. It's not skipping through the daisies and seeing kumbaya and going, oh, this is going to be a celebration. Woohoo. But it is about thinking from the positive point of view. And for those of you that are worried about, but what if the conversation is not going to be positive, Paula and I will be presenting a webinar in a couple of weeks' time around what about the tough conversations as well. But let's think about for the majority of conversations, how do we really keep that mindset positive, not dreading the conversation, actually thinking about it in a positive way. Yeah, and you were talking to me also about moving away from this idea that it's an annual conversation, and you know, oh, that's why it's so hard, because like, I can't remember what you've done over the last 12 months, things like that. And you were saying that that's what people are saying, like they can't remember what people have done over the last 12 months.
Yeah, correct. Look, if we go to best practice, so if you can go and Google anyone you like, and they will say that best practice is, and there are some organizations moving away from annual performance reviews because it suggests to a manager you only have an annual conversation. The truth is, the best practice says you should be having monthly check-ins with your team, and those monthly check-ins aren't a tick the box, what are you working on? Those monthly check-ins should be really coaching sessions where you're looking at what successes that person has had in the month, where have they had any challenges, what support do they need for those challenges, what will the focus be for the next month. And if you're having those monthly conversations, when you get to the formal annual conversation, it should actually not be very taxing, because if you record it and you've got record of it and you're having beautiful conversations, then this one is just saying, hey, let's look over the 12 months. Let's look at what were those achievements as we went through. Let's look at the areas where you had challenges and what you did to overcome them. It's very different to having to go, oh, back in October, did they do anything? You've already got the data and the information. You've already set how the conversations are going. So this is just the 12th one, and it doesn't need to be daunting at all.
More like a summary conversation, as opposed to let's have a think about what did you actually do in October, as you said. Yeah, and like I think that's what I love about you, Paula, is like, as you're speaking, you were just rolling those coaching questions off the top of your head. And so if anyone, I mean, there's lots of really great coaches on the line. It's the Open Door alumni, but even experienced coaches like myself, I don't mind just stopping, pausing the recording, writing down those questions, because they actually are the questions that we should be having on a monthly basis. So yeah, thank you for rolling those. We're going to have to write them all down as we go. Yeah. So the other thing that you have been talking about is, in our conversation so far as well, is about giving it the focus it deserves. So that's about monthly conversations. But you alluded to, it's not just that kind of tick boxing exercise as well.
Yeah, so fundamentally, if you want to have high performing teams, we know the stats talk about, you know, the reasons people leave jobs and the reason people stay, and we're high performing teams, and honestly, managers, they rate highly. So if you have a great manager having great conversations and really bringing out the best in people, you are going to find that employee satisfaction is high, and that people are achieving their goals. And so for managers, it's about, and for us coaching managers, it's really about helping them understand that if you focus in on your employees, the more you know about them, the more you know about what makes them tick, the more you can see or hear when things aren't going right and can connect in with that. That focus is about people, and it's the focus about understanding them and wanting them to really achieve well. So the annual performance section sits in there because it's about how you're connecting in with them, how you're focusing on them in that particular point in time, and really helping to guide them and build their capability in the areas that they need. So, and to be honest, if you give lip service, if managers give lip service to performance reviews and the like, that's how their team are going to run with it, and that's how and they're not necessarily going to get the best out of the team, because they don't feel valued. It's conversations and connection is how people feel valued.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. So if your annual performance review, as I've seen, is in the past, like in a past life, is just to cut and paste, the job description. I'm just thinking, what a waste of a good quality half-hour conversation. Like, what a waste of a coaching opportunity, really, if we're just cutting and pasting, going, well, you don't want to develop anything, let's just put something in there. So I think that's where I don't want to waste that opportunity. And I think the tips that you're talking about so far, Paula, are all linked to that as well.
Yeah, and it's even things like if the staff members have to do a self-evaluation. I have had a lot of managers in my time, who don't read the self-evaluation before they go into the meeting. And I think if you're a staff member and you put time and effort into your own evaluation, and then you get to the meeting and the manager, one, doesn't talk about it, doesn't reflect on it, hasn't even read it, what does that tell me as a staff member? So it's those things. And I know that sounds crazy, but I honestly, I have seen managers who have done it. I've heard it. I know the stories. And that's where if you can't focus on it and give it what it needs, then that's what it says to the staff member.
It's funny you bring that up, because I'm thinking about like a conversation I had with a manager in a million years ago, past life, and it's like a corporate tree, corporate ladder climber, and I knew my manager wasn't going to be prepared. So this tip around taking responsibility, but I came in to tell that person all of the great things that I had done. I was young, I was ambitious, but I had to do that because I knew that he wouldn't have read anything. I knew that he wouldn't have prepared. And I actually laughed to myself because I had even prepared how much I thought I should get in terms of a pay rise. So, so I'm sorry, I just had a flashback. But it does speak to both those points that you're talking about, giving it the focus it deserves, reading the work that the person's put in, but also that the employee should take responsibility. So did you want to add a bit to that as well?
Yeah, so if you have systems in place where staff don't have an opportunity to do the reflection before they go in the meeting, I highly recommend that is included. I've also talked to my managers a lot about the fact that 50 years ago, the manager used to just talk at the staff member. Let's face it, that's quite often how it rolled. I say to my managers, it's actually time you should be doing much less talking, and the staff member should be doing all the talking. Ask super great questions and they will give you everything that you needed without you having to say anything. And let's face it, no one likes to be told anything. So in a performance review, if the staff member is doing most of the talking and they're actually coming to their own conclusions, then you are so far in advance, it's not funny. So it really is about give the power back to the employee in the conversations, and managers ask super great questions and get where you need to go without you having to tell anybody anything.
Yeah, and I think that's where the coaching really comes into it. And everyone on the line, feel free to jump in here as well, and tell us what you're thinking or how you're responding to what we're talking about as well. We will be holding a webinar next week, which I'm delighted you're coming back for as well, Paula, around the top coaching questions we can ask. But it really is where the manager is, and we're coaching managers to ask those really great questions. So give us some of your favorites, I suppose, is the question I'd like to ask.
Yeah, I think you start with, how have you felt you've gone this year? Where do you think your key strengths lie? What do you think has been your biggest challenge, and how did you overcome that? Where have you seen yourself fitting in from a culture perspective? Where would you like to see yourself fitting in from a culture perspective? What impact have you had from a team perspective? That's sort of the places that I'd start with managers is open it up. And look, one of my other tips here that I give my managers all the time is, if you have rating scales, nobody will ever agree that a rating scale is perfect. Never in a million years. It doesn't matter how many levels you have. It never fits quite right. And I actually recommend people don't even talk about the ratings in the performance conversation, particularly if your organization does calibrations, because it's a disaster. The focus is the conversation. So ignore the ratings, talk about it. And if you need to go back later and follow up with ratings, please do so. But if you talk about a rating in a performance conversation, do you know what the employee walks away with? The rating. They didn't hear
the number.
Didn't hear anything else. So when we're coaching our managers, coach them through not talking about that area. Look, if your system has to have it, then I won't override that. Don't tell them Paula said. But if your system doesn't require you to have that part of the conversation in that particular conversation, then leave it out, because you want the staff member to walk away with, thinking about what a great year they've had. Even if they haven't had a great year, you want them walking away with the words that were used and what the purpose of the words were, rather than my rating is whatever it is.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, I've done full workshops to help managers, work on the conversation, like you talk about, and the great coaching questions, and what does it mean from a rating point of view as well. So I've been involved in helping organizations do their calibration, but around the good coaching questions they can ask, which is a totally different way of thinking about it, I think, as well. And I see Matt's jumped in there as well. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you. He says, in my experience, until the team member has identified and owned the successful opportunity for themselves, they're unlikely to be motivated to act upon it. So that brings up questions for me, like, so what successes do you feel like you've had this year? Or let's talk about your successes, or what opportunities have you found, or what opportunities did you take this year? And we're not trying to take them off the top of our head. Like you said, we're looking at that 12-month process as well, and allowing the team member the opportunity to, as Matthew says, identify and own those successes and the opportunities as well. I also like that, what are you proud of? What are you proud of? Like, what is it this year? What do you feel that you've achieved? But also, what are you particularly proud of that we can, talk about as well? So I always like to start with that question as well.
Yeah, and even for myself, I won't lie to anybody. I didn't love performance reviews because I actually I found it slightly difficult to talk about ratings and things, because when you ask the question, did you meet the expectations of your role? I have a very high expectation for myself. So I very rarely looked at, was I above that? Because my expectation was that I delivered at the level that I expected it to be. Yeah. And so I used to feel slightly uncomfortable if we talked about, was it at this higher level? Because I've always wanted to do a really good job. And I think that's when we look at in the performance reviews, the more you know about your staff member, the more the manager knows about their staff member, the more you tailor that conversation as well. And some things, so I often didn't put some successes down because I assumed that was part of my job. But if a manager read my pre-work, they could highlight that and say, you've forgotten this one, and we think that's great because of this. So yeah, so it really is. I think the biggest key is to know your team and know going into that conversation what things they're not going to bring up so that you can bring them up for them, or to ask questions, ask some really great questions so that they do identify it. Because I think you're right, until someone says, I think that was great, or that's an area that I'm really interested in, you can make suggestions all you like, but it's not really going to be, they're not going to own it from at that point.
Yeah, true. And I think we'll be talking about overrating and underrating and that in our forthcoming webinars as well, because that's all part of performance reviews and performance conversations as well. I think and we will also talk about the tricky things. So what if an employee doesn't become prepared and all of those kind of things. But the real message I'm getting is around that that preparation, taking the time, thinking about the really lovely questions, the good coaching questions that we all take for granted, but we're going to be coaching managers in as well. And so I'm just conscious of the time now, Paula. So, when you're thinking about the season, so to speak, the next 3 months where we all enter into this process, what do you think that we could really be, and we're thinking ahead, what could we all be doing now? So maybe our performance reviews are not going to be held until, say, in a few months' time, but what could we all be doing now, just as a kind of a way of thinking and wrapping up for us?
Yeah, I actually think, and I ran a session with an entire leadership team last year around this, that said several months out, what can you be doing now that will set you up for success? And it really comes down to things like, can you block the time in your calendar now? Can you move meetings that aren't critical, so that you've got extra time to do these things? But the key one for me is that even with processes where something opens at a time and closes at a time, you're not bound by that. So if your managers wanted to start putting notes down, and then all they do have to do is copy and paste, but not in the old-fashioned way. But if people want to start doing that now, there's no reason why you can't do that. But if they're having regular catch-ups, have a chat that says performance reviews are coming up. How about you start thinking about going back over the notes and what this might look like for you? So even though there are timings, it doesn't mean you're bound by them. You can start thinking about how that looks and preset them. But to be honest, your managers will actually have better ideas than mine. All you have to do is ask them, what could you be doing now that will set this up for success next month? And I'm sure they will have an abundance of super cool things they could be doing. And and managers can be asking that of their team. We know that performance reviews coming up. What can we be doing now that means that we can dedicate the time that's needed for these at the time that we need it? What sort of things could we do as a team?
I think it's really great. It's a really great question. That preparation is the key. And I think by asking that question also, it comes full circle to where we started at the beginning of our conversation, Paula, around we want this to be a positive experience. So let's even talk about, what do we want this process to be like? In the past, it's been a pain in the neck, but let's sit down as a team and go, what do we want for this? We would talk on the Cert 4 about the higher purpose, or what are we trying to achieve by these performance reviews, and how do we enable that positive process as well? So there's some good questions we could ask ourselves, I think, as sitting down as a team as well.
Absolutely. And the more you engage with your team on this, the more successful it's likely to be.
Yeah, well, that's a great way of rounding it off. So I want to thank you, Paula, for those of you that are interested. Leaders Coach program is sold out for this month, but it's very popular. So please feel free to jump on. That is actually coaching managers to coach their teams. And we will be talking a bit about this as we go along in that session. We've got our Cert 4 in Workplace and Business Coaching coming up, got a diploma coming up, which is very exciting as well. Feel free to scan, hit us up on the socials, etc., etc. Thank you so much, Paula. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the team as our resident HR specialist. We are really going to be looking forward to picking your brains on all of these topics, including the difficult topics as well. So thank you so much for your time today and sharing all your tips with us.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Well, everyone, I wish you, if you're listening to this live, a very happy Friday, happy day. If you're into it on the podcast, then happy day to you as well. And as we always say, we round off by saying, enjoy your coaching, everyone. So have a great weekend if you're listening to this live, and enjoy your coaching.